It was a clear autumn evening, the crisp Swiss air sharp against the skin. The last rays of the sun began to dip beneath the horizon, casting an amber glow over the pristine grass courts of the prestigious Swiss tennis club. Roger Federer, widely regarded as one of the greatest tennis players to ever grace the sport, had decided to spend the evening practicing for an upcoming tournament. He had always been a perfectionist, endlessly striving to refine his craft. But tonight, something felt different. The usual calm of the courts was gone. An uneasy tension hung in the air. Roger couldn't place it, but he could feel it, like a cloud just beyond his consciousness, a creeping sense that something was wrong. The grounds were eerily empty. It was late for practice, and most of the club members had already retreated into the warmth of their homes. Only a few lights illuminated the courts, casting long shadows. He pulled his jacket tighter around his shoulders as the wind picked up, sending a chill through the air. Roger stepped onto the court and began his warm-up routine. A few serves, a few ground strokes, the familiar rhythm of the game grounding him, but it didn't take long before the strange feeling crept back, gnawing at the edges of his mind. He paused mid-swing, his racket in hand, and glanced around the darkened grounds. There was no one there, no one except for a figure standing near the far corner of the court. At first, he thought it was just his mind playing tricks, perhaps a shadow cast by the light post. But the figure didn't move. It was tall, shrouded in darkness, its outline almost blending with the night. Roger's heart began to race. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up as a sudden unease overtook him. He didn't like it. He cleared his throat, trying to shake off the discomfort. "Hello?" His voice echoed in the stillness. The figure didn't respond. It didn't even flinch. Roger felt a chill run through him. He knew that he should be cautious. He had never liked the idea of being on the court alone at night, especially when he wasn't expecting anyone. For a moment, Roger considered leaving, but something inside him, something deeper than his typical sense of caution, urged him to investigate. He slowly walked toward the corner of the court, his footsteps muffled by the grass. As he drew closer, his anxiety only grew. The figure was still standing there, unmoving. "Hey!" Roger called again, more firmly this time, though his voice was laced with unease. Suddenly, the figure stirred. It took a slow, deliberate step forward, and then, without warning, it began to run towards him, fast and unnervingly silent. Roger's heart pounded. He instinctively gripped his racket tighter, a flash of adrenaline surging through his veins. This wasn't a normal encounter. He could feel it now. This wasn't a fan or even a curious bystander. This was something else. The figure reached the center of the court in seconds, its movements almost unnatural. It was too fast, too smooth, like a predator closing in on its prey. Roger pivoted to face it, his mind racing for a plan of action. His thoughts scrambled for something, anything that could explain what was happening. But there was no time to think. The figure stopped just a few feet from him, and for the first time, Roger saw its face, or what should have been its face. It was a mask of shadow, formless and shifting, as though its very features were made of darkness itself. Roger's breath caught in his throat. Without warning, a voice, a low, distorted whisper, slithered from the figure's lips. "You should not be here, Roger." His eyes widened. It knew his name. Roger stepped back, his hand instinctively reaching for his phone in his pocket. But before he could pull it out, the figure lunged toward him. A cold, icy wind whipped through the air, and Roger barely managed to sidestep, narrowly avoiding the creature's outstretched hand. He spun around, his pulse racing, and ran toward the nearest exit. But the world around him had changed. The familiar surroundings of the club were no longer recognizable. The trees were twisted, their branches like skeletal hands reaching for him. The courts were distorted, stretching out into a never-ending abyss. The ground beneath his feet seemed to shift and ripple, as if reality itself was warping. Roger's mind was in chaos. He could barely keep his thoughts together as he sprinted through the distorted landscape. The figure was following him, always just a few steps behind, its breath icy and unnatural. He stumbled as he ran, his legs heavy, his mind struggling to comprehend what was happening. Was this some sort of nightmare? Was he hallucinating? Or was this something far more sinister? The wind howled around him, growing louder and more furious. He could hear the whispering voice again, now clearer, now more menacing. You cannot escape, Roger. You cannot outrun fate. Roger's fear intensified as the figure seemed to close in on him. He pushed himself harder, his lungs burning, but it was no use. The creature was too fast. With a final burst of speed, it lunged forward, its cold fingers grazing his shoulder. The world around him blurred. And then, everything stopped. Suddenly, the distorted landscape fell silent. The air was still, the ground solid beneath his feet. The oppressive darkness lifted, and Roger found himself standing alone on the tennis court again. His breath came in ragged gasps as he looked around, disoriented. Was it over? Roger felt a cold sweat cling to his skin as he tried to calm his breathing. He blinked rapidly, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The figure was gone. The night was peaceful again, as if nothing had ever happened. But deep down, Roger knew that something had changed. His body ached with exhaustion, his mind unable to comprehend the surreal encounter he had just lived through. Had it been real, or had it been some manifestation of his own fears? Either way, the experience had shaken him to his core. And then, from somewhere in the distance, came that whisper once more. This is just the beginning, Roger. The wind picked up again, carrying with it the faint sound of the creature's laugh, a low, hollow sound that echoed in the back of his mind. Roger Federer wasn't sure what was happening, but one thing was clear. He had just faced something far darker than any opponent he had ever faced on the court, and the worst was yet to come.